Hi everybody, my name is Mo. Welcome to my channel. And today I'm going to be talking about another topic that is highly requested, and it's how to Japa to the US. And then for the non-Nigerians who are listening to this, Japa just really means relocating. For the next couple of minutes, we're going to talk about 4 different pathways you can use to legally emigrate into the US. And the first one is through having a student visa. The second one is through an employer visa. And the next one is through self-petitioning. And then the final one is going to be how to get into the US through a startup visa. So those are the 4 things we're going to be talking about today. And then just sit back, relax. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. So the first pathway, which is the one I'm super familiar with, is the student route. The student route, in my own estimation, is probably the easiest route, but that's because that's the route I took to get into the US. So what do you need to do? You need to get admission into a US school. Typically, I advise people to get admission into one of the top 25 schools. And when I say one of the top 25 schools, I mean just looking at the different rankings. I personally don't believe in rankings, but a lot of other people do, right? So you need to look at the kind of school it is. You need to make sure that it's a quality school and the school is actually genuine. I've had situations where people have gotten admission into schools that actually do not exist. So first of all, you need to make sure that you get a credible admission. After your admission process, the school is going to send you all of the information and data that you need in order to apply for a student visa. At the point where you're applying for a student visa, this particular video is not talking about applying for visas, but at the point where you're applying for the student visa, you need to make sure that you have all your credentials in check. And your credentials are going to depend on who's paying your school fees, where exactly in the US you're going to live, and how your living expenses are going to be handled. If you're going to take an on-campus job, if you're going to take a job with a professor, all of those kind of things, make sure you have all of those details in place as you go to the embassy. Now, when you get to the embassy on the day of your interview, it's a very simple thing. You are going to the US for school, and these are your documentation, and this is how you are going to support yourself during your time in the US. I've heard situations where people are denied student visas, but more often than not, most people get the student visas, right? Because they have all of their documents in check. Now, after you get your student visa, right, the next thing is to actually move to the US. So you move to the US and then you actually go to school. The part of going to school is very important because if you move to the US, like you Japa, and you're like, hey, I have the visa now, I can do whatever I want, and you decide not to go to school, you are in breach of the terms of your visa. So your immigration status is already in jeopardy. So you have to go to school. You have to register for a minimum amount of courses, and that's really dependent on your school. After school, depending on the course that you study, if it's undergrad, if it's master's, if it's sciences, if it's the arts, you have something that is called an OPT, which is the optional practical training. Usually, if you are in the sciences, you have 3 years of OPT, which means that you have 3 years work permits to get practical training in the US. All you just need to do is find an employer that is willing to take you during that OPT period. And if you're not in the sciences and you have a master's, you typically have a 1-year OPT. So I had 1-year OPT because I studied law, but a lot of my other colleagues who were in sciences, they had 3 years of OPT. What I would say about the student visa though is that during the OPT period, that's when you want to figure out a job that is going to give you a bit of permanence. You know what I mean? And it's just an employer that is willing to file an employment green card for you. It's not an easy find, but the best time to actually look for it is during the OPT period. Again, this video is just talking about the different pathways. We're not going to delve really deep into the student visas. Now, the second thing which I just mentioned is really the employer route, right? It's possible for you to actually maybe be in Kenya or Nigeria and then you get an offer. Again, you need to make sure that it's a credible offer because I've had situations with people getting jobs from LinkedIn and then they find out that it's not credible. But there are a lot of, for instance, a couple of days ago, I heard that this international this big tech company, right? One of the biggest tech companies in Silicon Valley actually was coming to Nigeria to recruit. So again, because the world is a lot smaller and the world has collapsed into a smaller entity because of COVID, right? A lot more employers are willing to employ talent from different parts of the world. Now, not everybody who is an international employer would be offering relocation, right? But some actually do. And that's one of the easier ways to emigrate into the US. So the first thing is you get your employer. Make sure that your employer gives you an employment agreement. An employment agreement is very different from an independent contractor agreement. And why that's important is because when you are relocating because of your employer, right, they have a degree of responsibility towards you. And that degree of responsibility is not going to be covered by an independent contractor agreement. So make sure that you have a full employment agreement. And that's because the employment laws in the US are very protective of employees to an extent, right? So you want to make sure that you can avail yourself of those protections. So that's what I would say about an employment visa. An employer visa also allows you to an extent to bring your spouse. And whether your spouse can or cannot work in the US will really depend on the terms of your employment visa. So that's the second pathway. The third pathway I was going to talk about, which is something that a lot of people don't yet know, is really the self-petition. So let's say you don't want to go to school, right? You're like, hey, I'm done reading books. I don't want to go to school anymore. Or you are like, oh, you know what? I don't want an employer, right? I just want to go to the US because I'm pretty awesome. There's some people like that, right? So you can self-petition. That visa category is called an EB2 with a NIW. NIW means National Interest Waiver. So basically what you're saying by the time you put in your application is that you're telling the US government that, hey, I'm so awesome that you want me as part of your country. And me coming into your country is in the interest of America, which is where you have the National Interest Waiver. Because usually when you're coming in under the EB2 visa, what typically happens is that you need to have something that is called a labor certification, right? But if you come in with the National Interest Waiver, you're telling the US government that, hey, you know what? It's in the interest of the US that I come into this country. And you may be wondering, you're like, Mo, is this actually possible? Yes, it's possible. And I'll give you categories of people who get this sort of visas. We have people who have garnered a sort of reputation in their own country, good reputation, right? For something that they did, something extraordinary, right? That they did in their country. People like that can get these visas. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for instance, I don't know if you've heard of this NGO called Chess and Slums, right? The founder can say, oh, you know what? I want to move to the US, right? I've done amazing work with Chess and Slums. I want to replicate that in the US, right? Somebody like that, I'm not saying for sure. Tunde, if you're watching this video, I'm not saying for sure, but I'm just saying that somebody like that would be a good candidate to apply for something like this. This is just to give you that sort of context. And for non-Nigerians who don't know Chess and Slums, I'm just going to do a quick plug. Please go and check them out. Amazing, amazing work that they do. Now, another category of people that apply for this sort of visas are celebrities, right? People who have contributed to the arts and culture of a particular country. And they're like, hey, you know what? If I come into the US, I'll be able to contribute to, the same thing in the same degree that I've contributed in my own country as well. Another set of people that get this are actually professionals. Funny enough, a lot of professionals, if you have a master's degree, there are a lot of different qualifications that you need, right? But one of the key ones is if you have a master's degree, you are recognized in your field as an expert. You've written publications. You've spoken at talks on a particular topic. You are just generally recognized by your peers as an expert in a particular field. Yes, you might be a good candidate for this waiver. So it's a very broad category, but it's also something to look at, especially if you are a professional who has become an expert in their field in their own country. You have articles published, or maybe you even have news articles published about you, or you've given interviews and things like that. Those things are very helpful. And by self-petitioning, it means that you can also just do the application by yourself. Typically, you need a lawyer, and I would advise you to get an immigration lawyer, but you can also do it yourself. Another category of people, final category of people that get this are also doctors. I have a lot of doctor friends who are able to get these visas because in some parts of the US, there's shortage of medical personnel. And then they're like, hey, you know what? Me coming into the US is obviously in the interest of the US. So yes, that's that about self-petitioning. And the final pathway is one that I'm very familiar with, and we just started working on that category a couple of years ago, and it's called the O visa. This particular visa is for startup entrepreneurs. Now, a lot of people don't know this visa, but just to give you an idea, what the O visa does is that it helps you to move into the US and stay. It gives you a 5-year validity on that visa, and then you can come live in the US as long as you are working on a US business. So a lot of people who have US registered businesses are able to apply for this visa. Again, there are different qualifications that you need to meet, like showing that, your idea is innovative, the business is actually a going concern. Things like how much money you've raised from investors are typically very helpful. To be honest, I've seen a lot of people get that visa, and, it's something to look into if you think that you fall into this category as well. So yes, in this video, like I said, we're just talking about the different pathways for you to Japa. This is just an introduction, and depending on the comments and the questions that you ask me, I'll probably do a deeper dive into any or all of the different pathways. So I hope you learned something. And if you did, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel because there's more of this coming. And then let me know in the comments the particular category that you want me to talk about, the particular pathway to Japa into the US that you want me to talk about. I'll be happy to do a video on that one.